My parents always joked that I was the tragic mistake that ruined their wild 20s, while my younger brother was their planned blessing. I returned the favor at their massive 30th anniversary vow renewal in front of everyone they spent their entire lives trying to impress. If you grew up in a family where you were always the punchline, you know exactly how exhausting it is to force a smile while your soul is quietly being crushed. For as long as I can remember, my parents had this hilarious running joke. They had me when they were just 19 years old, fresh out of high school, completely broke, and entirely unprepared for a child. 10 years later, after my dad got a stable corporate job and my mom finished her degree, they had my brother, Chase. The dynamic was established almost immediately. I was the rough draft. Chase was the masterpiece. I was the accident that forced them to eat ramen and live in a cramped apartment. Chase was the miracle baby who got to grow up in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs with a golden retriever and a college fund. They loved to make sure everyone knew this. At family barbecues, neighborhood block parties, and even in line at the grocery store, my dad would introduce us by saying, "This is our golden boy, Chase, and this is our little accident, Maya," who made sure I never got to take my 20s for a test drive. Everyone always laughed. They thought it was the funniest, most relatable parenting humor in the world. But when you are 7 or 10 or 15 years old, hearing that your very existence was a burden doesn't feel like a joke. It feels like an apology you constantly owe them just for breathing. My mom would back him up, too. If we were shopping for clothes and I asked for a slightly more expensive pair of jeans, she would sigh dramatically, look at the cashier, and say, well, if she hadn't come along and drained our bank accounts back in the day, maybe we'd be rich enough to afford designer denim. When I brought home a straight A report card, they'd glance at it and say, not bad for a mistake. But when Chase literally managed to get a C- in middle school gym class, they took him out for ice cream to celebrate his effort. The absolute worst part was that they thought I was totally fine with it. They thought I was in on the joke. If I ever looked upset, I was too sensitive or lacking a sense of humor. So I learned to shut down. I became the invisible, low-maintenance kid. I got my first job at 15 working at a local diner, just so I could pay for my own clothes, my own school supplies, and eventually, my own beat-up Honda Civic. I didn't want to owe them a single dime, because every dime spent on me was treated like a tragic loss to their personal freedom. When it came time for college, the difference in how they treated us became impossible to ignore. I got accepted into a fantastic out-of-state university with a partial academic scholarship. When I sat them down to talk about how we could cover the rest of the tuition, my dad literally laughed. He said, Maya, we sacrificed the best years of our lives raising you. We are not sacrificing our retirement too. You're on your own. I was gutted, but I didn't cry in front of them. I took out massive student loans, worked 3 different jobs, including a grueling night shift at a hotel front desk, and graduated with honors. They didn't even come to my graduation because it clashed with one of Chase's high school baseball tournaments. Fast forward a few years. I was exhausted, burned out, but finally finding my footing. I met an amazing guy during my junior year of college. Let's call him Liam. Liam was kind, patient, and came from a very warm, supportive family. I made the mistake of bringing him home for Thanksgiving during our senior year. We were sitting around the dining room table, picking at the turkey, when my dad decided to pull out his greatest hits. He looked right at Liam, chuckled, and pointed his fork at me. Careful with this one, Liam. She's an accident. She has a habit of ruining perfectly good plans, just like she ruined my college years. Liam looked absolutely horrified. He didn't laugh. He just stared at my dad and said, I think she's the best thing that ever happened to me. The room got dead silent. My parents were deeply offended that Liam didn't play along with their toxic little game. A few months later, Liam broke up with me. It broke my heart, but he was completely honest about why. He sat me down in my tiny apartment, held my hands, and said, Maya, I love you, but I can't marry into a family that hates you. It makes me physically sick to watch them tear you down, and it makes me even sicker that you just sit there and take it. That was my wake-up call. I realized that my family's toxic dynamic wasn't just hurting my past, it was destroying my future. I decided right then and there to distance myself. I stopped calling. I stopped going home for minor holidays. I put all of my energy, all of my anger, and all of my pain into my career. I started a digital marketing agency from my tiny apartment. I worked 80-hour weeks. I built a roster of high-paying clients. By the time I was 28, I was making multiple 6 figures. I owned my own home. I was entirely self-sufficient. Meanwhile, the blessing was having a very different journey. Chase went to a wildly expensive private college, fully funded by my parents. He dropped out after 3 semesters because it was bad for his mental health. Over the next 5 years, my parents bought him 2 different brand new cars, bailed him out of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, and let him live in their basement rent-free while he tried to become a cryptocurrency influencer. They completely drained their savings for him. The financial security they always bragged about having after I left the house was completely gone, eaten up by their golden boy. But to the outside world, and on their Facebook pages, they were still the perfect, wealthy, suburban couple. Then came the planning for their 30th wedding anniversary. My parents are obsessed with their image. They wanted to throw a massive vow renewal ceremony at the most exclusive country club in our hometown. They invited over 200 guests. Extended family, old college friends, dad's corporate buddies, everyone. They wanted a live band, a top-tier open bar, imported flowers, the works. There was only one problem. They were broke. About 6 months before the event, my mom called me. She was crying. She gave me this long, desperate sob story about how inflation was hitting them hard, how dad's investments took a hit, and how they just really needed some help funding this anniversary party. She said, "Maya, you're doing so well for yourself. Family helps family. We raised you, we put a roof over your head, and it would mean the world to us if you could pitch in." I knew exactly what was happening. I knew they had drained their accounts for Chase. But as I sat there listening to her cry, a very different plan started forming in my mind. I told her I wouldn't just pitch in. I told her I would cover the entire thing. Every single penny. The venue, the catering, the photographer, the band, all of it. My mom started sobbing with joy, calling me an angel. But I gave her one strict condition. I said, "I will pay for the entire event, but I want to be the one to give the final toast of the night. I want to honor our family my way." She agreed instantly. She didn't even hesitate. For the next 6 months, I played the perfect, supportive daughter. I dropped nearly $40,000 on this party, but I didn't stop there. I hired a private investigator to do a deep dive into my parents' finances, just to confirm what I already suspected. The investigator found exactly what I was looking for. My parents had taken out a massive second mortgage on their house to pay off a business loan that Chase had defaulted on. They were currently 3 months behind on their payments and dangerously close to foreclosure. I took a chunk of my company's profits and I bought the debt. I went through the legal channels, dealt with the bank, and paid off the delinquent balance, putting the title of their home essentially in my hands. I held all the cards. I owned the party, and I owned their roof. The night of the vow renewal finally arrived. The country club looked absolutely gorgeous. There were crystal chandeliers, massive floral centerpieces on every table, and waiters walking around with trays of champagne. My parents were dressed to the nines, glowing, working the room like celebrities. Chase was there, of course, wearing a velvet tuxedo he definitely couldn't afford, acting like the heir to a fortune that no longer existed. Dinner was served, the drinks were flowing, and everyone was having an incredible time. Then, it was time for the speeches. My dad got up on the stage, grabbed the microphone, and looked out over the crowd. He gave this long, incredibly arrogant speech about how amazing his life was, how successful he had been, and how much he loved his beautiful wife. And then, right on cue, he went for the joke. He smiled, pointed at my table, and said, "You know, 30 years goes by fast." It probably would have been 30 years of luxury vacations and early retirement if our little accident, Maya, hadn't come along and ruined our 20s. The crowd erupted into laughter. Some of the older relatives nodded along, chuckling. Chase smirked at me from across the room. My dad put his arm around my mom. But it all worked out, because 10 years later, God gave us our true blessing, Chase. The kid who showed us what real joy is. More applause, more cheers. My parents kissed, and the crowd went wild. Then, the band leader announced that I had a few words to say. I stood up. I smoothed out my dress, walked up to the stage, and took the microphone from my dad. He was beaming, expecting me to shower them with praise and talk about how grateful I was that they didn't leave me in a basket on a fire station doorstep. I looked out at the 200 guests. The room was buzzing with happy energy. I took a deep breath. "My dad is right," I started, my voice echoing through the massive ballroom. I was the mistake. For 30 years, I have been the punchline of every family dinner, every holiday, and every introduction. I was the rough draft, the accident. And my brother, Chase, was the planned blessing. People were still smiling, thinking I was just playing into the joke. My dad chuckled beside me. But as you get older, I continued, dropping the smile completely, you realize that sometimes the joke doesn't match the reality. Because the funny thing about being the mistake is that you learn how to take care of yourself. You learn how to survive when nobody else is looking out for you. The room started to get a little quieter. The smiles began to fade from the faces in the front row. My mom shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded stack of papers. You see, the planned blessing Chase, is currently $30,000 in credit card debt. He has dropped out of college 3 times. He has never held a job for more than 6 months. And the reason my parents were joking about luxury vacations earlier is because they don't have any money left. They drained their entire life savings, bailing the blessing out of jail, paying his rent, and funding his failed crypto startup. The silence in the ballroom was so heavy, you could have heard a pin drop. Nobody was breathing. My dad's face went completely pale. He reached out to grab the microphone, but I took a step back, keeping it firmly in my grip. "Maya, stop," he hissed under his breath, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "No, Dad, we're honoring the family tonight. Remember?" I said into the mic, making sure everyone heard it. I held up the first piece of paper. "This is the itemized receipt for tonight's party. The venue, the food, the open bar you are all enjoying right now. It cost exactly $42,600. My parents didn't pay a single cent of it. The mistake paid for it. Because they begged me to." A woman in the back row gasped out loud. Chase was staring at his shoes, his face bright red, looking like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. I held up the second piece of paper. "And this," I said, my voice steady and cold, "is the foreclosure notice on my parents' house from 3 weeks ago. They took out a second mortgage to pay off Chase's debts, and they defaulted. The bank was going to take the house." My mom started crying loudly, burying her face in her hands. "But don't worry," I said, looking right at my parents. "I bought the debt. I paid it off. The house is safe." Because despite 30 years of being told I was a burden who ruined your lives, I still stepped up when your golden boy bled you dry. I lowered the papers and looked out at the crowd of horrified relatives and friends. My dad always loved to say that I ruined his plans. Well, tonight, I'm finally fixing that mistake. I am officially removing myself from the narrative. I paid for this party to give you one last night of pretending you were the perfect family. Enjoy the champagne. I bought the good stuff. I dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, piercing screech of feedback. I didn't look back. I walked straight down the center aisle, out the heavy double doors of the country club, and handed the valet my ticket. The night air had never felt so crisp, so clean, and so incredibly free. By the time I got home, my phone had over 80 missed calls and 100 text messages. Some were from furious relatives calling me a monster for humiliating my parents in public. Some were from my parents, begging me to answer the phone and talk to them. And a surprising number were from my aunts and cousins, quietly texting me things like, "It's about time someone said it, and we are so proud of you." I blocked my parents' numbers. I blocked Chase. I blocked every single relative who dared to defend them. I transferred the deed of the house entirely into their name with a strict legal note that I would never, under any circumstances, assume liability for their finances again. They were entirely on their own. It's been over a year since that night. I haven't spoken to them once. My business has doubled in size. My stress levels have plummeted. And for the first time in my entire life, I don't feel like I have to apologize for existing. I am not a rough draft. I am not a punchline. I am exactly who I was meant to be, and I built my life with my own 2 hands. Family is supposed to be a safe haven, not a place where you are constantly reminded of how little you matter. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stand up, tell the truth, and walk away from the people who refuse to see your worth. If you've ever had to deal with a toxic family dynamic, or if you know exactly how it feels to finally stand up for yourself after years of being pushed down, hit the like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe for more crazy stories, and drop a comment below telling me your experience. I read every single one of them, and I'd love to hear how you broke free. Catch you in the next one.